Our scripture reading this morning is from the book of John, chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks be to God.
Well, I have to admit that every time I hear Jesus use shepherd language, I immediately think of the beloved stained glass window in the Friday Harbor Presbyterian Church, a church where I was a member and the church in which I was ordained. This window was actually in their old sanctuary that was built, in the early 1900s. And when they built their new sanctuary across the street from the old one, this window was so beloved that went and took center place in their new sanctuary. In this window, Jesus is depicted as the Good Shepherd. And through the artistry of the stained glass, we see Jesus wearing a flowing white robe, his long brown hair pushed back, a small beard, somehow incredibly well manicured, standing, holding one lamb in his arms while surrounded by a flock of innocent-looking, fluffy white sheep. Most of them with their little faces pointing upward as if he is speaking to them. In the window, Jesus looks peaceful. And if one can project human emotion onto sheep, the sheep appear blissful, like they know that they are safer in that moment than they have ever been before. It's a lovely image of the Good Shepherd surrounded by his flock. But other than seeing those kind of stained glass windows my entire church life, I have not had a great deal of other positive experience with sheep. How about you? And the shepherds, I'm sorry if I say anything that offends you today. I have encountered sheep at the state and county fairs, and they just always seemed kind of smelly and messy. And the sheep never looked like those beautiful sheep in the stained glass window. They were not blissful looking or fluffy or lovely little sheep. When I've seen them at petting zoos, they were always kind of dirty with spots of matted wool going down their back. They did not look into our eyes longingly for safety, but rather used their determined noses to pry open our hands so that they could get more of the feed before they moved on to their next snack. That has been my experience with sheep. And because of some of those rather grimy experiences, I never quite clicked with Jesus' imagery in this text. I know that we are all supposed to be the flock of sheep, but but frankly, something gets lost in the translation from more than 2,000 years ago in Palestine to today. Who wants to be a bunch of grimy sheep? Yet I did a little bit of research, and I found my sheep prejudice beginning to fade. Although, apparently, sheep are indeed grimier in real life than they appear in stained glass windows, they possess some traits that I actually rather admire. Now, some of you may already know this, but please bear with me. And again, my apologies to the shepherds. I'm sure your sheep are quite lovely. First, I discovered that sheep, unlike cows, refuse to be pushed around. While cows may respond to being pushed from behind, sheep prefer to be led. A man who grew up on a Midwestern sheep farm reported to his preacher that sheep will not go anywhere unless someone else goes first. They insist by their behavior that their shepherd go ahead of them to demonstrate that the path or the pasture is safe. That's pretty smart sheep behavior, if you ask me. Furthermore, that is behavior with which we might all identify. We all want someone who will show us the way, right? We all want someone who will walk before us, reassuring us as we follow that everything is going to be okay. We all want someone who will demonstrate by example that we have nothing to fear on the road ahead, even when it seems cloaked in darkness and mystery. The second thing I discovered is not only do sheep prefer to be led by their shepherd, but they also grow very connected with their leader as well. The Midwestern shepherd claimed it never ceased to amaze him that he could walk through his sleeping flock without ever having one of them raise a head in alarm. But a stranger? Well, a stranger could not take even one step into their sheepfold without causing pure pandemonium. A single step by a stranger sent the sheep into chaos. They instinctively know the difference between their good shepherd and someone who could be intent on harm. And something within the sheep knows when an intruder invades, and in response, they refuse to follow. They refuse to follow the voice of the one who does not know them. And instead, the sheep will just scatter all about. Sheep seem to consider the shepherd to be not just their leader, but a part of their own sheep family, if you will. The shepherd and the sheep even develop a language of their own. Like a parent of a newborn child, the attentive shepherd learns to recognize the difference between a bleat of pain and a bleat of pleasure. By listening to the sheep's cry, the shepherd figures out what that sheep needs. And that recognition goes both ways. If the sheep are gathered around a watering hole and the shepherd can give his signal and the sheep know it's time to go home, it doesn't matter if the flocks are all mixed up together and an outsider would never be able to tell which sheep belong to what shepherd. As soon as the shepherd plays or makes his shepherd's call, the sheep of his fold recognize the shepherd is calling them home, and they immediately begin to follow. Therefore, with all of this in mind, I suppose one could be likened to worse things than a canny, intuitive, albeit still grimy sheep. But the clincher for me, the part of Jesus' teaching that makes me throw my heart and my arms wide open to being compared to a sheep, is verse 3. The shepherd calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. That is such a powerful image. The shepherd walks in to the midst of the flock, knows each sheep by name, calls it out, walks ahead and waits for each one of them to follow. With his figure of speech, as John calls it, Jesus paints a picture of the immanence, the closeness, the intimacy that we enjoy with God, our Creator. And this picture is a compelling and much-needed reminder for those of us who make our home in the church. For in our Reformed theological tradition, we focus a great deal on the transcendence of God. God as great mystery, ground of all being, over and above us, always beyond us, just out of our reach of comprehension and definition and grasp. And God's transcendent nature is biblical and faithful and true. Yet often with that singular focus, I wonder if we sometimes lose the promise of the intimacy and immanence reflected in this verse. We lose the promise and the claim that yes, while God will always be more than we can imagine, God also knows each of our names. God knows Philip. God knows Annette. God knows Tracy and Miguel. God knows Maria and Byron. God knows each of our names. Yet this passage declares to us that God does not only know our names, but Jesus' imagery of a good shepherd and the sheep of his fold remind us of the promise that God also knows us so well that God can recognize the difference between our cries of despair and our cries of joy. God can recognize the difference between our standard response of, "I'm fine," when asked out of routine, from how we really feel underneath our matted, woolly fur, whether we are scared or sad or angry. The God who knows our name also knows when we come into worship if we are wearing our church face, our "I've got it all together" face, or if we are wearing the face of really who we are and what we are feeling that day. Those times when we are more vulnerable or closer to the water, the more tender one and face that lies beneath that pushy, determined nose, beneath all of the strong Teflon power masks that we wear sometimes. This verse, indeed this entire section of pastoral imagery that continues through verse 18, while embedded in a time of conflict in Jesus' ministry, reminds us of our intimacy with God, our being fully known by God, that we've been given in Jesus, our Good Shepherd. And though his picture of the Good Shepherd and the canny, intuitive sheep, Jesus is preaching to us that we can trust and we can build our foundation upon the promise that the great mystery, the ground of all being, the one who is over and above, all powerful, everywhere present, incomprehensible and undefinable, that God knows each of us by our name. And that God will call each of us by our name as the Holy One leads us out of what is familiar pasture into new life, going ahead of us so that we know it is safe and good to follow our shepherd. For that is the other evocative image for that is the other evocative aspect of this imagery. With all that we now know about shepherding and sheep, we can remember just how the sheep are led. We can recall that part of the reason the sheep trust the voice of the shepherd is because they know that he or she will always go first. The sheep know the shepherd will always experience the journey before they do, so that the sheep have no need to fear being abandoned or purposefully led into danger. The shepherd never leads the sheep to a place that he or she has not been, has not experienced, has not touched, or walked first. Friends, that is incarnation. God becoming flesh and blood in a baby, born into this world through a woman. That is crucifixion, God experiencing betrayal and suffering and death firsthand, not escaping it, but willingly entering into it. That is resurrection, God wrenching forth new life out of old and new possibility out of tragedy, refusing to let death have the last word and emptying it of its power. This picture of Jesus Christ as our good shepherd reminds us that he will always lead us on the right paths that he has already walked. And this is what we claim as people who follow God on the way of Jesus, as God's Easter people. We claim that in Jesus Christ, all of life and death has been hallowed or made holy. We claim that our Good Shepherd has traveled all the paths that we take in our lives. Our Good Shepherd has already experienced the journey firsthand so that we can be assured of God's presence on our way. I am the Good Shepherd, Jesus claims in the verses that immediately follow these that we were given today. I am the one who knows you by name. I am the one who calls you and leads you out, the one who created you and abides within you and will not forsake you, especially not in these days of chaos and uncertainty. I am the Good Shepherd, Jesus says, the one who lays down his own life for the sheep. One more interesting image that emerges from this text before we finish. This passage is often used as a tool for Christian exclusivism. It's often used to buttress a preacher's argument about whom God saves and therefore whom God does not save. Who goes into the fold? Who is let in through the gate? But when it is used in this way, it is being wielded as stone rather than offered as bread. For nowhere in this text does it say that the sheep, not even the sheep with the ministerial stole, ever get to choose who is in the flock and who is out. The sheep never get to choose who goes in through the gate and when and how. They're not in charge of any of that. No, apparently the shepherd is the only one who can call the flock together, who forms them into a sheep family, and who leads them wherever they are to go. The shepherd is the only one who has the authority to make those decisions. The sheep simply don't have that power. The sheep are just brought into the flock. They must simply learn how to abide with each other and live together. The shepherd is the one who defines the flock and who watches the gate, not the sheep. Interesting, isn't it? It's not the sheep's decision whom God chooses. Those decisions are up to the shepherd. And well, a few verses later, Jesus declares that he has other sheep that are not even a part of this particular fold. Thus, it would not surprise me one bit if our shepherd has a much bigger flock than any of us can even imagine. A pasture big enough for everyone to find a place to graze. A gate wide enough for all of creation to make its way through. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see for ourselves one day. But in the meantime, may we find rest in the assurance that we are called and we are known. May we find comfort that even if we don't feel very wise sometimes, Jesus promises us that we will recognize the shepherd's voice as he calls. And if we will listen to the Spirit that dwells within us, we will not follow a stranger. Friends, may we find courage in the promise that Jesus goes ahead of us always, and that it's Jesus that holds our life. For since Jesus is our good shepherd, we can trust that the one who knows us the best is the same one who loves us the most. That is just who God is. Praise be to God. Amen.